Hey, strangers, welcome to the Vale. You can call me Kay. And today, y'all. Okay, I gave you three choices at the end of my last video, and no one answered. So I asked one of my friends, and she was like, fam, this one. So, congratulations. You get to hear about my dream travel trip, uh, which is also all of the bone churches. Bone churches are neat. So for today, I'm working on something for my Comic-Con costume. It's going to be a skirt. It's made of skulls, which is fitting for this topic today. And y'all, I took notes. I know that just got really right. I took notes because this is seriously one of my favorite topics. So I'll put in links to different places in case you want to do some more research, but it is so freaking fun. So, first off, let's talk about ossuaries. Um, for those of you who are unfamiliar, an ossuary is basically a bone chapel. It was really popular in some places around the 18th century, that sort of thing. And there are still ossuaries that you can go and visit. And often the bones were arranged in a really beautiful design, or they were painted, or sometimes they were just stacked, like the French catacombs. And so it's a very interesting topic, and I am psyched about it. Um, so the first place, Saint Michan's Church in Dublin. I'm so sorry if I can't pronounce anything because y'all, I speak Spanish. And so sometimes I look at things and I will pronounce them like I would in Spanish. And I know that is not correct because some of these that I'm talking about are going to be in Italy or Portugal. And I'm aware that I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm aware that I sound like I am saying it in Spanish because I am. Uh, so we'll just go with that. But yes, St. Mission's Church in Dublin, Ireland. Um, they they had these vaults underneath the church that contained limestone, and so there are some corpses that are still there that were kind of naturally preserved by the environment. And so it was either because the vaults had limestone in the walls or because of the temperature or the climate. It was a very interesting thing. But there are four corpses that are like the corpses, like those are the ones you got to see. But there are a variety of different remains that you can go and see. And so the first of the big four is a woman just known as the unknown. Like, no one really knows who she is or why she's there, but she's there. The second is the thief. They're missing parts of both feet and an entire hand, and it's speculated that they were a thief originally, which is how they lost the hand, and then later became a priest and was buried under the church, which is so cool. There's one that has been speculated to be 800 years old, about. It's very tall, about 6.5 feet tall, and it is known as the Crusader. And this is real creepy. It was mummified with its hand like stretched out, like it wants you to shake it. And for a while, visitors were actually allowed to shake this mummy's hand, which, y'all, if this is like the haunted tour of your dreams, like hit me up because I need people to go and visit all of these skeleton places with me. It would be great. Um, yes, is it so Dublin, Ireland, first thing on the list. The second would be the Monastery de San Francisco in Lima, Peru. And that one I can actually say because Peru. But um it's an absolutely gorgeous place. Tons of history and a beautiful, beautiful monastery, but they have catacombs. And so it was an old cemetery in colonial times until around 1808. And there were upwards of about 25,000 people buried there, and the bones are arranged and classified by types. They're arranged artistically. That was definitely a thing where the whole body wasn't kept together in these ossuaries. They were kind of decorative. And so they would take these skulls would be in one place and different bones would be in another. And there's also the Monastery de San Francisco is really fun because it's speculated that there are some doors that would lead to tunnels to other churches at one point. So secret underground tunnels, y'all, in addition to almost definitely being haunted. Neat. Um, and then there are a couple, moving on from that one, there are a couple of Capuchin crypts around Italy. And so the Capuchins were separated from the San Franciscans in around 1525. They wanted to live more in the spirit of St. Francis, live more authentically, more basics in life. And so there are a couple of these crypts around Italy. The first is in Rome, and it's real interesting. They have around 3,600 people who were buried there. There are 5 different rooms that are all named, like the Crypt of Skulls and the Crypt of Pelvises and things like that, which is super neat. And then and so they have these specific ones for specific kinds of bones. And then they have like mummified arms, these like robed, hooded skeleton figures that like stand in the rooms. It's crazy awesome. In addition to that, there's a crypt, again, a Capuchin crypt in Palermo, Italy. And during this time around the area, mummification became really popular. Um, it was a sign of wealth, a sign of status that you could be mummified. And so in this crypt in Palermo, there are all of these mummified remains of people who or, were fairly wealthy and they wanted to be dignified in death. One quote that I found while I was researching this is death looks at them and it seems to have missed all shots, which was brilliant. So originally 45 naturally mummified friars were found there. And so no one had done anything to mummify them. It was very similar to the limestone idea where just the environment was perfect for it. And so while they were exhuming some corpses in order to create a larger cemetery in the cave systems that already existed, they found these remains. And so it became a big thing to be buried there. And it was closed around 1880, um, with 2 exceptions. And one of those exceptions was a little girl who died when she was 2 years old. Her name was Rosalia Lombardo, and she is known as the world's most beautiful mummy. So there you go, Palermo, Italy. After that, we have the Capella dos Osos, and I know I said that wrong. It's in Evora, Portugal, and Portugal. Um, and it was built by Franciscan friars. It has around 5,000 corpses that were specifically exhumed to decorate this chapel in the 16th century. And it, like, entering this chapel, there's this really ominous, "We, the bones that are here, await yours" on the, oh, so neat. Oh, I love a good ghost story. And if this is not like, I want to go so bad. There's a crazy awesome poem as well, and I'll put the links to all of this research that I did. So go back, read the poem. It's like, dang, fam, what you doing? Um, so next we have this one's back in Italy, San Bernardino Agioso, Ossa in Milan, Italy. And it is an ossuary. It's a small side chapel. And in 1210, the cemetery ran out of space, and so the room was built to hold more bones. And so some of the bones are believed to belong to martyrs who were killed by heretics, but most of them came from a nearby hospital and people who died in the prisons there. And basically, a lot of these are because the cemeteries ran out of room. They had mass graves due to pandemics or epidemics, and there were people who died in wars, people who died in hospitals, and they just ran out of room for these people to be buried. And so they made these ossuaries to to have a place to put the bones, essentially. And that kind of goes on to this next one near Salzburg, Austria. There we go, I can talk today. um in Hallstatt, there is a Karner, which is basically the German name for ossuary. And in for this one, ossuaries were a very popular thing. It continued until the late 18th century, and so graves would be rented for 10 to 30 years, and then the bones were exhumed and moved to these coroners, so that the graves could be reused. And so families could rent these, and it was a lot cheaper than trying to buy the land permanently. And so the really interesting thing about these coroners in Austria is in Hallstatt specifically, it became tradition to paint these skulls before placing them there. And so these skulls are painted with the name of the person, the year they died, and then flowers and other decorations to make them really beautiful. And so now, presently, bones are only moved there if specifically requested by someone who is local. And so someone who's local could write in their will and say, I want my bones to be moved into the coroner. It hasn't happened in very, very many years. I think 1930 something was the last one that moved in there. Um, but you can request it if you are a local, which is real neat. But yeah, 10 out of 10. Really, really want to go and see that one, especially just because of that specific tradition of painting skulls. That one is a slightly less common thing that you see. Kind of reminds me of the sugar skulls, in South American countries. Real interesting. And then of course, if you're going on a tour to see all of the bone churches, you can't miss out on the French catacombs. Y'all, I went to Paris, and that was the only thing I wanted to see. I was like, I really, really, really want to see the catacombs. And I was heartbroken because the 2 days we were in Paris, the catacombs were on strike. And I was devastated. So I'm gonna have to go back and see them. So basically, in Paris, there was a lot of mass graves and things happening. And there in 1780, burials within the city walls were forbidden because there were people, they didn't want anyone to get sick. It started to smell like there wasn't enough room to bury the bodies. Again, a very common theme in all of these places. And so they had these kind of abandoned and collapsed limestone quarries that were underneath the city pretty deep. And so after they started having problems where these mass graves would collapse, just because of how the city was built and all of these other things. And so they started moving these corpses into the abandoned limestone quarries. And that it kind of eliminated the overflowing cemeteries. It gave them a use for these things that were already abandoned. And so you have more than 6 million remains of people that were stacked up in these old abandoned quarries. And those became these ossuaries and these catacombs in France, which is lit. Um, and most of these are ossuaries, these are churches, but also in Serbia there is a skull tower. If you learn a little bit about the Ottoman Empire, it was not uncommon to have these really elaborate kind of intimidation tactics, right? And so after a Serbian rebellion, the Ottoman Empire constructed this tower of skulls on the borders of their land that was made with the skulls of the rebels that fought them, um, which is absolutely insane. It was dismantled in 1861, but then partially restored in 1878 because you can't just erase history, you kind of got to acknowledge that it was there and then move on. And so a chapel was constructed in 1892 around it, and there are still 58 skulls that remain on the tower walls. There were originally more, no one's quite sure exactly how many, but now there are 58, and I would love to see that as well. It's just a small little chapel now, and you can go in and see this tower where it was. There is also a skull chapel at St. Bartholomew's Church in Poland. And I do have the name of the city, but I'm not even going to try and pronounce that one. I apologize. If someone could let me know how to pronounce it, that would be great. But so it again serves as a mass grave, and it has thousands upon thousands, around 24,000 actually, uh, skulls and other remains. It was built in 1776 and added to for the next 18 years. The idea for it was inspired actually by the Capuchin cemetery in Rome. It was inspired by those crypts. And so the priest, Vaclav Tomasic, and a gravedigger, a local gravedigger who the name is J. Langer, they were inspired by these crypts in Rome and they were like, that would be amazing. And so they found all of these mass graves of people who died in wars and things like that nearby, and they collected these remains to uh, to decorate this chapel. And Thomasic described it as a sanctuary of silence. He was very passionate. This was his passion project, was decorating the church with bones. I feel like we would have gotten along. It would be good. Um, but yeah, people who died during so gosh, all of the different wars and epidemics that were around during the time. And these two people just got together and were like, those crypts in Rome, what if? And so that would just be so neat to see. And then you have oh gosh, I think it's Saint Maria is the actual church associated with this one, but it's the Wamba ossuary in Spain. Uh, and so it's one of the country's largest ossuaries. The skulls, there are skulls of about 3,000 or more monks and villagers. And it was built sometime between the 12th and 18th century. Nothing is really placed super carefully. There's a general disarray to how all of the bones were put in there, and so it's hard to tell exactly when it was put together and why. There is a quote next to one of the graves, though, that says, "As you see, I saw myself as you see me. You see, all ends here. Think about it, and you will not sin." And so uh, it was a warning to the living, I suppose, which is really, really interesting. And then my personal favorite out of all of these, uh, there there are a lot of really good ones, and I want to just plan a trip and go and see all of these in one trip and come back with probably more ghosts than I had when I left. Um, but my absolute favorite out of all of these is the Sedlec Ossuary in the Czech Republic. It contains the remains of 40,000 to 70,000 people. And so it's super neat. Basically, an abbot went to the Holy Lands and came back, and he sprinkled a bit of dirt from Golgotha in the cemetery, and it became a really desirable burial site. And so there were a lot of people who wanted to be buried there. And then around the Black Plague, even more people were buried there, and the cemetery had to be enlarged. And then later on, around the 1400s, a church was built in the center of the cemetery. And so, in order to do that, they had to exhume some of the remains um, for room. And then the cemetery was already overflowing. And so, they took the remains that they had taken out to make room for this church. And they turned the church into an ossuary as well, so that they had somewhere to put the bones. And then later on, in 1870, they hired a wood carver. His last name was Rint, if I'm remembering correctly. And he was hired to basically organize these bones. And fam, if he did not just go right in 100% on this job, wow. Basically, there is a coat of arms of one of the royal families nearby, made entirely of bones. There is a chandelier that contains at least one of every bone in the human body. It's if you look up pictures, it is so cool. Rint was like, I'm gonna do this and it's gonna be amazing. And it was. And so there you go. Bone churches. If you ever want to have a really interesting thing to research, and you're welcome. This video is longer than most, and it's about 20 minutes long now. Wow, here we are. But it's yeah, it's an absolutely fabulous thing. I would love to go on a trip and just go see all of these churches. It's real interesting. Um, I I hope y'all are doing well. As we'll continue on this. I'm so excited for it to be a skirt. Uh, and I will see y'all next week. And I'm thinking liquid mercury for next week, and I am going to try and upload at least once a week. I haven't been doing very good at it, but I am going to try. But for now, my lovely strangers, I will talk to you later.